Greetings, everyone. Let's start with a line you might know. O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? But why thou and not you? Today, we, the Syntaxians, will uncover how English pronouns once revealed not just grammar, but social relationships, intimacy, and even power in representation entitled Pronoun Declensions in Early Modern English, roughly 1500s to 1700s. Let's now proceed to our objectives. By the end of the presentation, learners will be able to gain the following, and the presenters are hoping that these objectives will be achieved by the end of their presentation. Next slide, please. So here's the roadmap that will help us through our journey today. First, we will begin by exploring the historical context behind the changes in pronoun usage. Then we will take a closer look at the actual pronoun declension patterns. After that, we will examine how and why these patterns evolved over time, including the social forces driving these shifts. And finally, we will discuss why all of this matters for modern English. So for the introduction, the period known as early modern English, spanning roughly from the late 15th to late 17th centuries, marks a crucial phase in the history of the English language. This era, sometimes called Shakespearean English, began with the transition from Middle English and led into modern English. It was a time of profound linguistic transformation influenced by major social, political, and technological changes such as the introduction of the printing press, the English Renaissance, and the Reformation. During this period, English underwent significant changes in grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and spelling. One of the most notable grammatical changes of this period was the evolution of the English pronoun system, particularly the declension patterns of personal pronouns. Early English saw the evolution of personal pronouns, especially in their declension patterns. That is how pronouns changed form depending on their grammatical rule. This included distinctions between singular and plural forms, as well as formal and informal second-person pronouns, which gradually simplified into the forms we use today. So for today's presentation, we will be focusing on the morphological changes in pronoun declensions, its patterns and evolution, and the social and regional factors influencing these changes, as well as the significance of these changes in modern English. Now, we will proceed to the main discussion. Next slide, please. And we will start by exploring the historical linguistic context of pronoun declension. Next, we will provide an overview of declension patterns before moving on to examine the patterns and evolution of pronoun declensions in early modern English. Following that, we will look into the social and regional variation in pronoun usage. And finally, we will discuss the significance of pronoun declensions in the development of early modern English. Let's begin with the historical and linguistic context. So first, what is declension? To simply put, declension is the way a word, especially a noun or pronoun, changes its form to show its role in a sentence. This includes changes to indicate things like case, whether the word is a subject, object, or shows possession, number, singular or plural, and sometimes gender, whether it is a feminine, masculine, or neuter gender word. For example, in early modern English, pronouns changed form depending on whether they were the subject, I, the object, me, or possessive, my. These are different cases in declension. Back in Middle English, pronouns had a pretty rich system of these forms inherited from Old English, including nominative, accusative, genitive, and dative cases. But during the early modern English period, this system started to simplify. English was moving from a language full of endings and inflections to a more straightforward, analytic language where word order and helper words took over many functions. Why did this happen? Well, it wasn't just a random thing that happened on a random day. The social and political upheavals of that time, like the Reformation and England's expanding colonial reach, helped spread and standardize language forms. Plus, the printing of some of the influential texts like the King James Bible and the Book of Common Prayer made certain forms familiar to many people, encouraging uniformity. Linguists like Class of 2017 explained that this simplification was partly due to phonological erosion, where sounds in words gradually faded, and syntactic reanalysis, where people started to interpret sentence structures differently. Also, the influence of Norman French and Latin, especially in formal writing, help level out some of the more complex pronoun forms. So, the history of pronoun declensions in early modern English is really about how English grammar became simpler and more standardized, reflecting both changes inside the language and the social forces shaping how people spoke and wrote today. So, for the patterns and evolution, let's now hear from Miss Molas as she will concisely explain it.
Thank you, but before we proceed, we must know what are these words. When we talk about nominative, it is the subject. It is the nominative case marks the noun or pronoun that performs the actions of a verb, the subject of the sentence. It answers the questions who or what is doing the actions. On the other hand, oblique or object is a broad term for nouns or pronouns that functions as object, direct, indirect, or object of a prepositions. In a sentence, they receive the actions of are affected by it. And lastly is genitive. It is possessive. It refers to the marks ownership, relationship, or association between nouns. It answers the questions whose or of what. And now let's proceed for declension system. As you can see, we have table here. The table outlines principal declensions patterns for personal pronouns in early modern English, categorized by persons, number, case, and gender. For instance, the first person singular is represented by I, in the nominative case me, in the objective my, as the attribute genitive mine, as the predictive genitive, and myself reflexively. The second person singular forms include thou and thee, showing archaic distinctions between singular, plural, and informal formal address, while plural forms like ye, you illustrate the modern shape where you serves both roles. The third person maintains gender distinctions in the singular he, she, it, and uses gender neutral forms in the plural. The table summarizes the morphological forms of early modern English pronouns, reflecting both retentions of inflectional distinctions of ongoing simplifications processes during the period. And we have three types of declension system. First is case retentions. In linguistics, this is when certain word classes like personal pronouns keep a more complex grammatical case system compared to other word types. Next is thou, you distinctions. During early modern English in 1500 to 1700, the second person's pronoun system changed from number-based to status-based, leading to the eventual loss of thou in standard English. Lastly is gender in third person. While early modern English pronouns declensions was in transitions, the third persons largely solidified into its modern gender distinguished form is changed from started in Middle English. And now let's proceed for the next slide, which will be discussed by Miss Jimenez.
Thank you. Now let's proceed to the discussion of the evolution and changes of pronoun declension in early modern English. During the early modern English period, major changes occurred in the way pronouns were used and declined. Case distinctions gradually weakened, most notably between ye, the nominative, and you, the objective, until you became the standard form for both subject and object, as well as for both singular and plural uses. Older grammatical features such as gender distinctions and the dual number were most notably lost, leaving only he, she, and it to mark gender in the third person singular. The most striking change was the shift from thou and thee to you, a transition driven by both linguistic simplification and social factors like politeness and formality. By the early 18th century, you had become the universal pronoun in both everyday and formal contexts. Other developments included the rise of compound pronouns such as anybody, someone, and everybody, many of which had roots in Middle English but became more common in 1500s and 1700s. Reflective pronouns standardized into forms ending in self or selves, while who began to replace that and which as the preferred relative pronoun for people. Evidence from Shakespeare's works and private letters of the time highlights these transitions in real usage, where thou still expressed intimacy and you conveyed respect or social distance. These shifts mark the period as one of linguistic simplification, but also of growing social nuance in English pronoun use. So now, let's hear from Mr. Tanyerla as he gives a brief and concise explanation on the social and cultural impact.
For social and cultural impact slide, first is politeness shift, replacing though with you universally reflected evolving social norms, politeness, and formality and address. One of the biggest takeaways from this period is how language mirrored social manners. We saw the complete replacement of though with you. It wasn't just a grammatical change. It signaled a new level of politeness in and formality becoming the new norm in everyday address. As back then, though was used to address people in lower class and you was the more respectful pronoun in addressing a superior. Think of it as society deciding to upgrade the level of courtesy built into the language. Second is social hierarchy. We can clearly see social hierarchy at work by looking at texts like Shakespeare. People used your when addressing a superior, like a king, your majesty, your excellency, but the king would use the less formal thy or thee back to a subject. These pronouns choices are served as a quick linguistic badge of social rank and respect. Third is gender variation. Historical corpus data suggest gender differences in language use, like women using more pronouns than men. Even centuries ago, language used back by social group studies of historical texts show that there were measurable gender differences. For instance, women tended to use more pronouns than men, since pronouns are interpreted and seen as more for interrelationships, like personal relationships, while men used more nouns for academic and informational text. Although not explicitly stated, language interpretation, narrative, and interpersonal discourse interpreted it that way. Fourth is modern social drivers and inclusivity. Modern inclusivity, current social factors, especially the push for gender inclusivity, motivate the adoption of new forms. Fast forward to today, pronouns are a hot topic because social factors continue to drive change. Pronouns are a closed class, meaning they resist change, but the demand for gender fair language and inclusivity is pushing for the adoption of new forms like the widely accepted singular they. This shows that our modern need for respect and representation is directly changing the grammar of English. And for significance and conclusion, Old English had a complex gendered and case mark pronoun system that gradually simplified over time. The starting point for English was incredibly complex. Old English used pronouns that were highly inflected for case, number, and gender. For instance, noun and pronouns were marked for masculine, feminine, and neuter grammatical genders, distinctions we've completely lost today. The early modern English period saw the breakdown of this complexity, moving us toward the simplified system we use today. Second is loss of inflectional endings led to reliance on word order for grammatical meaning. Um, and all those complicated case endings eroded away, the nominative, accusative, dative, English could no longer rely on a of on ending of a word to tell you if it was a subject or the object. So this created a fundamental need to shift. Instead of using inflections, English started to rely on fixed word order. This transition solidified subject verb object SVO as the core rule of English syntax, which is still the key principle for sentence structure. Transition from old to early modern English marked a shift from inflection to syntax as the main grammatical guide. The summary of the previous one, the decline of pronoun declensions, essentially forced a tectonic shift in the language. We moved from a highly inflected language where endings matter to a highly analytic syntactic language where word position matters. This is arguably the most significant grammatical change in English history and how we form every sentence. And for conclusion,
So for the conclusion, what have we learned from this presentation? Early modern English pronoun declensions are a perfect case study of language change. Internal pressures like phonological erosion, external forces like politeness norms, and technology like the printing press all work together. The thou or you shift wasn't just grammatical, it was a social revolution, and this process isn't over. Just as early modern speakers negotiated new pronoun systems, we're doing the same with singular they and gender neutral options. And that ends our presentation. Thank you all for listening.